going through this during last Christmas, surrounded by family. Not only was I feeling all of these symptoms, but then Christmas felt different. DPDR took everything from me. And then I'm like, and on top of it too, you're taking my favorite holiday, right? These thoughts are so intense. How am I going to go back to living normally? And they were so obscure and bizarre. And I thought my life was over, legitimately.
Is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yeah, 100%. It's almost so normal that it's kind of hilarious to look back at that time period and just be like, what was that?
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Brody Fleischacker, 30 years old, based in Phoenix, Arizona. Brody's experience with Depersonalization Disorder began after a sudden panic attack in the middle of the night, a moment that sent his mind and body into a tailspin and left him terrified, confused, and unsure of what was happening. His symptoms included intense existential thoughts, familiar places and people feeling off, strange, or unreal, and a constant sense of fear, feeling scared of literally everything. Brody's DPDR lasted for about 1 year in total, but the turning point came when he decided to reach out for help. We actually spoke together on a one-on-one coaching call earlier this year, and Brody began following the DP Manual program. And just a few weeks ago, Brody sent me a message that genuinely meant the world to me. He wrote, "With the DP Manual, I can say that I have made a full recovery. Without your program and videos, I would still be in a state of bewilderment on how to proceed with my life. I'd love the opportunity to share my story because I know how much others' stories gave me hope in the darkest time of my life." And today, that's exactly what Brody is doing, sharing his journey through DPDR, what helped him to recover, and what life feels like now that he's fully back to himself. Brody, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Brody, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Brody. I'm 30 years old. I turned 30 a couple months ago. Kind of, I guess, in a sense, restarting my life. I moved out to Phoenix kind of during this process, and I am a chef, and I'm kind of working at one of the more popular restaurants in this area. So that's pretty much what I do with my time.
Nice, nice. How has it been living in Phoenix, Arizona?
It's been hot. It's been definitely a change, but I have my whole family down here, so it's nicer to kind of be, closer to them and whatnot, so I can overlook the heat a little bit.
Right, right, right. And you had moved
Yeah.
from Colorado, so that's a fairly drastic difference in climate, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's no clouds out here ever. That's one of the biggest things I noticed. I'm
Right.
constantly under the sun. It's insane.
I can imagine. So Brody, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would have been around last October, I would say, when it really started, kind of, or when I guess I had that panic attack in the middle of the night. Um, Looking back on it, there was definitely a pressure cooker of a lot of different life circumstances that kind of led up to that moment. It wasn't, I think when it happened, I was very like, I don't even know what's going on, right? But kind of looking back, there was a lot of different life stressors that were slowly building up. And ultimately, in a weird way, I was sleeping one night and I had a dream, and the specifics of the dream were not anything too crazy. But I remember I woke up, it was about 3 a.m. and I woke up from that dream, and the first thing that kind of popped in my head was this voice was you can't keep running away from your problems, was ultimately what the dream had said to me. And I'm not huge on deciphering dreams. It was just what had occurred. And when that happened, I got hit with adrenaline and I started vomiting. And before I know it, it led to, months and months of DPDR in a sense. So I think it was just kind of a tipping point. I think my my body kind of hit this point of enough. We need to like get less stressors in our life and kind of move forward. So
Yeah. Had you ever had any experiences with panic before that, Brody?
yeah, I have. And I think that's why this was so I guess in my eyes concerning was this runs in my family pretty significantly, I would say. Just panic, anxiety, even like agoraphobia to a certain degree. So I'd always been kind of aware. And in my life, it was always, oh, well, I had a panic attack, right? I kind of shake it off and then move forward. I don't like them, obviously, but you move on. This stuck. I remember at the time when this was all going on, I was living with a buddy, and I remember specifically telling him, I said, I've had anxiety before. I don't know what this is. And I think that that true belief that something bigger happened um, was kind of a catalyst to it sticking around a lot longer. Was I believed that there was something more than it just being anxiety.
That's interesting. You talk about the idea of life stressors building up, and this is something that is quite common that I encounter with people. Um, People will often say, "Well, I don't know where the panic attack came from," which is the scariest part of a panic attack. But often, you can see that in retrospect, there may have been a confluence of different circumstances that led to a build-up of stress over time, and each one of these maybe circumstances on their own don't feel particularly frightening. They don't feel like what this is, it's just day-to-day stresses. But they build up and build up. And then at some point, your brain just says, okay, is Brody in danger here? Because this is a lot of stress. So
Mhm.
just in case he is, let's just go to DEFCON 1, you know, just in case, and then you wake up or you have the intense panic attack, but it feels like it's coming out of nowhere, even though it's been a build up in the background. But when it hits and your body is reacting as if the house is burning down, but there's nothing wrong happening around you, it's very, very frightening.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When it hits with that level of intensity, and then there is that kind of even after the the peak of a panic attack, that come down. I used to be able to come down to, a 2 or 3 on the anxiety level. Uh, I didn't leave like an 8 for multiple months. And so I think that was kind of the toughest part was why am I now scared to go to the grocery store? Why am I scared of looking at the sky? There was a lot of like very weird things, which then furthered that thought process of something bad happened, and then I'm having these feelings which are reinforcing that thought. And it really made it to be a very real and dark experience.
The idea that I've had anxiety before, but I don't know what this is extremely common as well. Uh, and it was for me because I had times where I felt anxiety prior to that, but to my experience with DPDR, but this was, the explanation that it was anxiety was it felt so small relative to what I was experiencing that it couldn't be the correct explanation. What I was experiencing was a whole different ballpark, like it was a whole different sport, right? So it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that it was just anxiety, in the same way that ultimately a panic attack is just anxiety. And the thing you mentioned about the grocery store and the sky as well and things like that is it's so interesting because ultimately all that's happening is that your body and brain are on high alert. Your pupils are dilated, letting as much information as possible, which, if you're in a life or death situation, is extremely useful. But when you're not, and you just walk outside and you're taking the dog for a walk, and then the sky feels too big, the sky feels frightening, you're seeing little visual symptoms and such, then we start to think that each one of these situations is its own issue. So going to the grocery store, now that's a whole obstacle I have to confront. Walking and looking at the sky, do I have to now avoid looking at the sky? And it feels like it's suddenly this whole kind of like labyrinth of obstacles has opened out in front of you. and how in the hell are you going to be able to live your life if you've to try to navigate through this labyrinth, through this maze, like, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it turned into, every little thing was kind of, was a problem to solve in a sense. And, um, I think luckily I was aware enough and I found the correct resources looking through you and a couple of others, that I realized I was like, it's anxiety. Now, I would be lying to you if I told you I didn't believe it, but I had no other alternative than to believe it, right? It was like there was moments and it was almost like it felt almost like schizophrenic in a way where I'd be like watching recovery stories on your channel, right? And it would be like my brain would be like, they're lying to you. Like you're pretty much stuck in this, right? Like this isn't real. Which that was concerning, right? And then you're analyzing those thoughts even. And it was just this really, it was just this loop. You just kept going in this loop. And I just remember being so exhausted, talking about it, thinking about it all the time. It was insane.
I took a quick look through our notes from our coaching session, Brody, before
Mm.
we spoke. And one of the notes that I had was that you had said, you had said, I'm effing tired of talking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was that was 3 months into it, and it continued for a little bit longer. And I think a big step in moving forward from it is to stop talking about it and to move forward with your life, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It,
I
it,
think
it, it,
I became obsessed with it. I became absolutely obsessed with it.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, it, yeah. When I think about my time with it, I remember it like I stopped what I was doing. I was a full-time musician at the time. I stopped doing that and I became a full-time private investigator into DPDR, and that's
Yeah.
an anxiety, and that's all I did for almost 2 years. I just read every book I could about it. I was on the forums. I was talking about it nonstop. I obsessed about it nonstop. Uh, yeah, which felt like the right thing to do at the time because because you're telling yourself, well, there's an answer here somewhere, but what you don't realize until you get the correct information is that that's just precipitating more of the anxiety. It's fueling the anxiety because it's the checking and the constant analyzing of it that's causing it to persist.
It almost felt as if I didn't read up on it and I didn't research it, that the worst case scenario was going to happen, right? Um, and I remember a little bit further on in the recovery process, I remember having this almost like visualization, right, of holding on to a ledge and you're holding on for dear life, right? And underneath you is like a smoky floor. But then once you like let go, you realize that the floor is literally right underneath that smoky floor and you've been fine the whole time, right? But it's you don't want to let go of that grasp on everything instead of just be like, I'm just gonna let this be and work itself out. Because it feels so real.
Can you tell us a bit more about the symptoms that you experienced across this period of time, Brody?
Yeah. The biggest one, without a doubt, was the existential thoughts. They were all day long. And it was dealing with legitimately everything. Um, it was My brain was obsessed with the why behind everything. And because I didn't have that answer, it would cause more questions. And um, that was one of the hardest ones because you can't answer those, you know? And so having to tell yourself and be okay with not knowing the answer and being okay with the uncertainty of things, um, is tough when you have an anxious brain and you're wanting those answers. And it almost seems like it almost seems like you are kind of messing with your safety if you don't have those answers, right? So that definitely the just feeling disconnected in general, being around family, friends, being in my room, even, you look around and it looks a little bit different, and that throws you for a little bit of a loop. Um, so that, and then yeah, and then there's the added anxiety aspect where I was terrified of everything. Um, there's some pretty, looking back, kind of comical things that I look back at where I was like, what was I so scared? Like, that's so insane. But yeah.
The existential thoughts are they're they can feel quite brutal. And they certainly did for me as well. And you're absolutely right. There, it feels like there's an imperative to try and solve them, to try and stop them. Um, and if you don't, they're going to remain there, and you can only divert your attention long enough before you have to get back to. For me, one of them was like thinking about like the size of the universe, or like the nature of consciousness, or how is my consciousness different from the consciousness of another human being or an animal or something like that. And again, it's one of these what feel like very urgent and kind of data driven questions that we have to figure out, but they're not based on data. They're based on anxiety. And if we feed those questions, if we try to research them or push back on them, it just tells your brain that they are important enough to deserve your attention and your focus when they're not. They're symptoms of anxiety in the same way that heart palpitations are a symptom of anxiety. If your heart was beating too quickly, you wouldn't get into an argument with your heart about it. You wouldn't like present data to your heart to be like, is there any chance you could slow down? It's not
Mhm.
going to work, right? Um,
Yeah.
but And the other thing about the existential thoughts is that, like, as awful as they feel at the start, it kind of makes sense that we would be having them in a condition like DPDR, because when you suddenly have a feeling of like total disconnection from yourself and the world around you, and you don't have an explanation for it. It's absolutely bizarre. You feel like you're in an episode of Black Mirror, right? Or you're in a first person video game all of a sudden. Um, And until you have a better explanation for it, we put all of these terrifying explanations that could relate to like philosophy and solipsism, existentialism, on top of it. Combine that with the fact that with anxiety, our thoughts are racing and jumping to the worst possible conclusions anyway. And it's this perfect storm of just being hammered by existential thoughts. I mean, and I remember for me, I remember feeling like it was like a building fell on top of me every couple of minutes. It was just I would get this. I was just like the insignificance of my existence in this to the scale of the universe, and it would literally hit me. My stomach would drop, my muscles would tense up. Oh my god, it's brutal until you understand it, and then it starts to make sense, and you can take some of the power back. But you're saying that was the most significant symptom that you experienced, Brody. So can you tell us about some of the others?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, with that disconnection, that was definitely a strange one. I remember, eh, waking up in the morning, right? And you kind of wake up and you're like, is it still there? Is it still there, right? And then you look around your room and you just feel like, I remember just like look, a room that I had been in at that point for 2 years, or I guess an apartment, right? Been in for 2 years, and I look around and it just looks a little off. And then once again, the anxiety runs its course. You're sitting there, and then because you feel a little off, there's the justification. Something is wrong, right? And then it starts your day off like that. And so it was almost like my brain was just scanning for any little piece of evidence to justify something is wrong. You have to put this at the forefront of your mind, and this needs to be the biggest part of your day. because your room looks a little bit different and it's wrong. So that was tough to handle because you're feeling, in all words, awful. But then your brain, it felt like my brain kind of had turned on me. So I had nowhere to run but kind of deal with it in the moment. And then these comfort places aren't even comfortable anymore. And I think that was a very concerning thing was I was just like, what happened? And I think that was the a big portion of the earlier on in my journey with this was this need to know what happened. But that need to know is what accentuated everything.
And so, following on from that, Brody, at what point did you come across the term depersonalization? And also, at what point did you start to understand that it was actually being driven by anxiety? Did you speak to any doctors, a therapist, or what was that like for you?
Because I've had panic attacks before in the past, and because I had, dealt with anxiety throughout my life, um, I had a moment of DPDR when I was younger, right out of high school. I remember like the transition of going into college. But at that point in time, I'll be honest, it just didn't scare me as much. I remember it was just kind of like there, and I was like, I remember being in the gym and doing push-ups and looking at my hands, and they looked different. And I remember thinking, that's odd. But it wasn't a gut punch, right? It was just kind of like, that's strange. And then before I know it, it just kind of disappeared. Um, and anytime I had panic attacks, I had little spurts of DPDR through the panic attacks. So I knew what it was, and I knew I didn't like that feeling. Um, to be honest with you, I had found your videos a long time ago through that time period. Um, but it was just never a thing where it stuck. It was just I would like I said, I would come down and then I'm back to living normal life. Well, when this happened, it was, I guess, so up in my face that luckily I was fortunate enough to there's still that logical side of your brain where I kind of know what's going on here. But then there was that emotional side being like, no, it's something worse. It's something bigger than what you think it is. And so when this hit, I realized, okay, I'm super duper anxious. What's going on? And then a couple weeks after that, it seemed as though the DPDR really started settling in. And I was like, this is a familiar feeling to me. I just don't know why it's sticking around. And that's kind of when I watched a couple of your recovery stories and I would hear, the explanations of especially the existential thoughts. And I was like, this is for sure what it is. And then obviously I reached out to you and we talked. So
It's a very common experience for people to experience DPDR when they're younger. I mean, DPDR is an extremely common experience in general. 75% of people will experience it at some point in their lives. And for people when they're younger, to experience it briefly and then for it to just to fade away. And that's one of the reasons for that is because when we're younger, our attention spans are shorter and we're so easily distractible that even if we do have an intense moment of DPDR, I mean, if you're doing push-ups and at the gym in high school and then but you're meeting your friends later on, like, and there's, you know, you've got a test tomorrow. So you just focus on other things. Whereas when we get older, we're a lot more aware of our internal processes and maybe more health conscious, health anxious even. So we spot a feeling like that and then start to catastrophize that, oh, this is something wrong. Why isn't this going away? And then we get into the feedback loop of checking on it, which inadvertently keeps it going. Yeah. Did you speak to any doctors or therapists, Brody?
yeah, so I talked with just a normal talk therapist. And it was helpful to a certain degree. But I also found I found these other guys on YouTube that they do a podcast and it's much more on anxiety disorders as a whole, right? And so the talk therapy was nice, but these guys' methodology, the DP manual's methodology, everything is about accept the feelings, right? And move on with your life and stay busy, right? And you don't need to figure this out before you live your life. And so that was the thing is yes, I had talked with someone, but I just didn't find it super beneficial because it's like I've heard this analogy of the when firefighters show up to a scene and there's a fire, they don't get there and say, well, what was the cause of this fire? It's like, let's put out the fire and then we can figure out the cause, right? And I think that's the thing for myself was the fire was raging with DPDR. The anxiety was incredibly intense. Let's try to get that calmed down and then we could start looking into your past. Because I think that's what was also tripping me up with a talk therapist was, you know, I talk with him once a week and I would just be sitting there waiting for that talk to just like unload how I was feeling because I was just like, what is going on? And we talk, and then it's just kind of like, so like tell me about your childhood. And I'm just like, I, what about right now? So it was it was a little tough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think there can be a tendency with the best of intentions that probably comes from the history of Freudian psychotherapy or psychoanalysis of tending to connect everything that's happening now to things that happened in the past and often very far back in the past. Um, that this must be happening because of trauma of something that happened to you, um, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that, and that's a fantastic analogy or metaphor that you used, um, uh, of thinking of the symptoms of anxiety as being like a fire. Okay, we'll get to what started the fire, but we can deal with these things now. So, like, even if the 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 panic attack that caused the DPDR was triggered by a series of events, one of which may have been a traumatic event. Okay, and it may be very, very valuable to unpack those at some point, but the symptoms of DPDR are symptoms of anxiety. Again, they're the mental equivalent of heart palpitations and muscle tension. So if you need, like, in order to stop or to reduce heart palpitations and muscle tension, for example, is it necessary for you to go back to a potential like trauma in your past? No, it's not. I mean, you can relax your muscles using exercises. You can train yourselves away from these symptoms quite quickly because they're happening in the moment. I think it overcomplicates it to try and connect it to create this kind of like this imaginary web of experiences that leads back to things in the past. I mean, and also there's a temptation to do it from the sufferer side as well, because when this happened to me, it felt so massive that I became convinced that there was something that had happened to me that I couldn't remember. Because like, what else could possibly have caused my life to get turned upside down overnight? Um, but the problem is that not the problem is, but my childhood was great. Like, I mean, I had the normal ups and downs of any kid, like, but things were fine. Things were really good. And there was nothing to explain it. Um, but I didn't need that. Occam's razor says all things being equal, the simplest explanation is the most likely. It's a panic attack. I had a panic attack and it triggered an anxiety-based condition. It does not need to be more complicated than that. And it's important to kind of take that extra cobwebbing off of it and just say, no, it can be that simple, and it's okay for it to be that simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's simple but not easy. And I think that is involved within the recovery process as well. Is it's the acts of what you need to do are very, very simple, but they're difficult. But you just take it day by day, you know. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Simple but uneasy is a really good way of describing it. It's a way of describing all habits. Uh, because that's what you are doing with recovery from any anxiety-based condition. You're changing a habit of thought and behavior in the same way that if you were to quit smoking, you're changing a habit of thought and behavior. Uh, Quitting smoking, uh, it's simple. Just stop smoking. Just stop smoking.
yeah,
Don't
hmm
just don't pick up the cigarette. Okay,
hmm
but it's not that easy. It's not
hmm
that easy. You can do it. It's entirely doable. It's changing a habit. The the the, the behavior or lack of behavior, or the change of behavior is simple, but the psychological processes behind it are not that easy. But they're not easy in the sense that they're not instantaneous. But when you understand the that with like discipline and patience, you start to see incremental improvements happening quite quickly. The same with changing any habit, same with going to the gym, same with learning a language. You're just essentially changing a habit.
absolutely. And as with any change of behavior and whatnot, I think throughout the process, there's the ups and downs. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Some days it's more. Some days you feel like you're back to kind of square one. Um, and you just got to keep when you look at it at more of a macro level, if you zoom out just a little bit, you're like, oh, actually, I wouldn't have been able to do this 3 months ago, And I think it's just, you know, get back on to living, carry these things with you, and then you stop being so. I think the real goal is to stop being so scared of these symptoms, right? And once you stop being so scared of them and you have the understanding around it, then they stop bothering you as much and then they just fade off into the background. It's very interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? Isn't it? And also, it's like we try to stop being scared of them instead of trying to kind of like beat them into submission or to actually pull pull a plug on them or switch them off. It's instead let them be there, but we change from being scared of them to being kind of annoyed with them, and then to just being indifferent to them, right? So in the same way that you're not trying to win an argument with them, but you're just letting them be there, and you're just kind of going, look, I've stuff to do, as you said, I'm sick of talking about this. Like I wouldn't mind reading a book. Like I wouldn't mind going to the movies. I've stuff to do, and changing that perspective on it really empowers the recovery process because it gives the brain this time and the space to let the symptoms go. Um. Brody, what was the lowest point in the whole experience? Is there a specific moment or a time that stays with you?
Yeah. I thought about this a little bit and, I definitely had, I would say, worse symptomatic days. But I think that last Christmas, I'm not a huge holiday guy, but I love Christmas. Christmas is my absolute favorite. And I think just the significance of, going through this during last Christmas, surrounded by family. And not only was I feeling all of these symptoms, but then Christmas felt different. I felt disconnected. I really could care less. I was once again, so obsessed with what was going on. And it just felt as though DPDR took everything from me. And then I'm like, and on top of it too, you're taking my favorite holiday, right? You're taking this time for my family. You're taking these really like important moments with, older people in my family that I don't know how many Christmases I'm going to have left with them, right? And I was just so preoccupied up in my mind that day that it just ended up not being a great experience. And then you beat yourself up for it, right? I should be happy right now. why everyone else is having a good time and I'm over here having an existential crisis on the couch. What is going on, right? And I think that was a really, really tough moment for me in general.
Yeah. Christmas, New Year's, birthdays feel particularly acute because it's not it's a milestone of the time passing as well. You know, it's not just another day. It's like, okay, well, this is a year that's gone, like, or whatever it's been. And and also the the knowledge that in the past I was able to connect to these holidays and these times and, you know, like relax and, you know, have a drink, eat food, watch movies, play, you know, and now it's just like, well, all these people around me are still doing that, but like I'm not part of this. I'm not even remotely a part of this anymore. Like I can't engage in a conversation without feeling panicky, not to mind all of the other activities that go on around Christmas. It's yeah, it feels quite brutal. It feels quite brutal when you're going through that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and I think that is kind of the most brutal thing about DPDR, right? Is your your personal reality has shifted to a certain degree to you. You are perceiving it in a different way. But then there's still that what and you can tell that's a very emotional thought process. You can feel the emotions behind the perception of your reality changing. But the scariest part is there's still that logical brain being like, nothing is different here. But I'm viewing everything differently. And that makes it even more concerning, right? Is because you're just like, why? You know, and that was the thing is the why behind it was, man, like I feel so different. I'm viewing everything differently. I'm scared of everything, but I know that I shouldn't be.
Your logical brain knows there's nothing wrong. Your logical brain is like looking around, going like, "Are we in a war zone? No. Is the house on fire? No. Is there a wild animal chasing me? No. Then why do I feel like this? What explanation is there? What are these existential thoughts about? Why am I why are these visual symptoms about? And and again, short of a proper label, it fills in all of these catastrophic gaps, jumping to all sorts of terrifying conclusions. Um, this is also the one of the the really positive things about anxiety and DPDR is that, you know, our what's known as reality testing remains intact, which is that you know exactly what's going on. Like, you know that this isn't like a paranoid delusion. It's not hallucinations. Um, but you also feel fundamentally disconnected from everything around you. Um, but fortunately, as recovery continues, it all comes back, and this Christmas will be much better. Like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And the recovery process was very difficult, right? There's the ups and downs of it. Um, and I think what's super interesting is that, as you kind of continue down the process, like I said, things will just kind of fade in the background and then little things will pop back up again. And I remember, I guess, further on into the process, probably a couple months ago, kind of thinking, am I recovered? I'd have days where I'm like, I think I am, right? And I think the true recovery is when you really stop like asking yourself that. It's just kind of like, yeah, I'm done, right? Um, but also too, a really big kind of like breakthrough for me, thought process was I remember pretty much feeling like almost all the way there. And but I would still have those moments or those days where I would just feel it just a little bit. I would have like one thought that would kind of like throw me off, right? And I remember having this thought process of we're only going to be able to move forward when I stop believing the lie that I told myself that something was actually wrong. And I think that was the thing is we believe so heavily that something is deeply wrong when in reality it is just anxiety. And once you kind of are able to shake off that and realize, no, like truly, like this is just anxiety and I am 100% okay. Um, that's really when I was able to kind of overcome that hump. And you know, it, I would say it's pretty much all gone. I have normal human anxiety, which is completely normal, right? But it's not catastrophic if I feel it, it's just kind of, all right, I'm there.
The feeling that something is deeply wrong is is so core to anxiety and DPDR, but it's the opposite of what's happening. Um, Nothing is wrong. There is nothing wrong. Your body is doing, your body and brain are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're just doing them at the wrong time. That's all. This is why when we go to get all of the medical tests done, uh, brain scans, visual scans, like nothing ever turns up. It's because nothing's wrong. Your body and brain can do this. They can be in a fight or flight response. It's deeply uncomfortable when it's not supposed to be happening, but nothing's wrong. It is still a protective mechanism. Um, and Understanding that is key to letting it go. Um, and so in terms of your recovery, then Brody, can you tell us more a bit more? Tell us more about what did it feel like? Was it in terms of kind of working and socializing and things like that? Was it a slow kind of fade in the background, or was there any kind of more sudden instances?
Yeah, I mean, it was a slow fade. Like I said, it's a very kind of up and down, almost like long-term, long-term growth on like a macro level, right? Um, Luckily, I had hit this point where, I think when we are hit with anxiety and DPDR, we feel as though I need to figure this out before I can do XYZ. Um, so when I moved out to Arizona, which was a big change for me and was honestly incredibly difficult, especially while in this state. But then I also went to culinary school during that time period. So I went to culinary school, and that kept a lot of my brain going. So I was in school 40 hours a week, and then I was working on the side as well during that time period. Now, while I was there, there was moments, but there was moments of feeling it very, very intensely. Pretty much the entire time I was in school, I had moments of feeling it, but once you kind of just keep focusing on different things, right? And not running to safe spaces and not, there was multiple days at school that I wanted to just leave and whatever, but I never did. It was okay, I'm here, I feel this, we just got to keep moving and shift our focus. And then, yeah, it's like I said, it slowly started kind of just seeping off into the background where I would on like a more of like a month by month basis, I would look back and be like, oh wow, I'm much better this month. Um, Look at all these things that have been happening. No, I'm not 100%, but I'm much better. I'm much better. And it just progressively started getting, I started really seeing that growth, um, to the point that you just kind of are back to normal. And what's funny is that when I was going through it, we tend to glamorize normality big time. And it was funny because I got back to normal. It's life. There's days that I am grumpy and I don't want to go to work. There's days that, I'm in a super good mood. Like I think in that situation, when you're going through DPDR, you think that normality, you're just going to be happy 24/7 and it's just going to be awesome. And I'm super grateful that I'm not going through DPDR anymore, but you're just back to normal. And it's just funny kind of looking at my thought process of what I thought normal was in my head.
Glamorizing normality is amazing. That's I'm using that from now on. That's exactly what it is. We think it's from yeah. For me, I thought it was going to be I'll I'll find some missing piece of this puzzle, and this veil will lift. This like uh pane of glass will slide away, and I will be. It'll be like a musical number in a Hollywood movie. You know, I'll be just like jumping around the place. Like it'll be amazing. Um, nah, nah. It just you get so completely back to normality and the normal kind of day to day concerns about like I need to pay the rent. I need to get my car insured. Uh, come back in so completely that the the what felt like these massive concerns about existential thoughts and DPDR are just like they're the least of your concerns, the least of your problems, you know. But that's a lovely thing as well, you know. It's the way I often might think of it is like if someone has a panic attack, and for 15 minutes they think that like, oh, this is it, I'm going to die, I'm going to go crazy, I'll never come back from this, I'll never be the same, my life is over, my life is gone, and then the panic attack passes, and then 20 minutes later they just continue doing their shopping for vegetables, like, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not comfortable. You can be a bit shaken after it, but that's all it is. It's just your anxiety going up here, staying there for longer than it should, coming back down, and all of these massive thoughts, the conviction that you had that you were going to die or you're going to go crazy, that your brain was broken. No, Shiv. Now if to now the shop's nearly closing, so I have to hurry up. You know,
For
it's
sure.
like that. It is actually like that. You know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, through the recovery process, you're it's a really good, I guess, lesson on life in general that I was able to kind of gain some wisdom on, right? Is y- as with all emotions, they're all fleeting. You may not be at a 10 on happiness at all points in time, right? And so I think the same principles that apply to anxiety, you're able to apply to every single other emotion and not get too attached to them. The thing with anxiety and why it sticks is it's incredibly uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for a reason. Your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to. And you're looking at it and it's the thing that bothers you the most, right? And so that is why it's sticking around. Um, if you're super over the top happy, it's not bothering you. So you're fine with it lasting forever, right? Um, and so it's just funny because all these kind of ebbs and flows of all these different emotions consistently, and it's just like as long as you don't get super attached to any to one of those, um, that's kind of the way kind of through it is just let it be there, enjoy it or don't enjoy it. You don't need to enjoy DPDR, but enjoy the happiness that you get, enjoy those like moments of peace. But then when those moments that are kind of more difficult come in, it's like, okay, well, we're here. I can fight it or let's continue forward, you know?
Did you find our Zoom coaching session helpful, Brody?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're very calming. You're very calming, which was nice. And listening to obviously like the DT manual, like audiobook was huge. This is one of those things where you can have all of the credentials in the world, right? As far as schooling goes. But this is one of those things where unless you've done it or not done it, unless you've been through it and overcome this, it's one of the things that I can't really take you seriously because it's very difficult to explain this to people. You know, I remember kind of trying to explain it to family and they're looking at me like, are we gonna have to lock this kid up? You know what I mean? It was, yeah, it was like it was a little, and that's coming. My stepdad is he's a emergency room nurse, so coming from a medical professional field, and then them kind of looking at me like, I've never heard this in my life, right? It's concerning. So I think, yeah, us being able to talk and no, it didn't. The one-on-one coaching session, I wasn't immediately cured after it, right? But I had a framework and I at least had that peace of mind of like, this is what I'm going through. And I see all these people on his channel. He himself has overcome this. And although I didn't, like I said earlier, like I didn't believe it, the simple solution did not seem like that was going to be the thing that got me out of it. I thought my life was over, legitimately. I truly did, and being able to kind of sit through that call and be like, okay, it just gave me that little bit of hope to continue and move forward.
It's great. I'm so happy it was helpful. And yeah, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical health professional. I'm a filmmaker, But I read a phrase that says, "I'm equipped to help the person I used to be," and I really like that. And I just think, um, if I could speak to myself back in 2005 when I was going through this first, what would I say? And also back in 2005, I would have given the world to have to be able to speak to somebody who had gone through this, because at the time there was, I mean, it's much better now. It's much better now. But back in the mid 2000s, there was virtually no resources available about it, but the awareness of it has grown. But I'm very, very happy that the call and the manual were helpful, Brody. So now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's completely normal. Uh, it's almost so normal that it's kind of hilarious to look back at that time period and just be like, what was that? It was like I cannot believe that I like got that tripped up. It was almost like it was like my brain for like a year, just all the wiring got like jumbled up, and it was just through the recovery process I kind of am slowly organizing all of the cables again, and then you get back to normal and you're like, okay, well that's cool. Well, rent's due, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel this. I felt this the exact same way when I recovered. And I always think of it like I clearly remember the time in my life where I couldn't go outside. I couldn't go to the bathroom at one point because there was a mirror in there and the mirror terrified me. Uh, the sky felt too big. My vision just felt like it was damaged. I thought I was going crazy. I thought my memory was gone. I remembered very clearly. I can't relate to it anymore. It's there, but I look back at it and there's a part of me that goes, but why? But I understand why. It's because my anxiety levels went way up and stayed there for longer than they should have done, and then they came back down. Um, but it is fascinating to look back at it with a bit of distance to understand it, because the way I feel we often understand it after we recover is we think of it in terms of what it was, which was anxiety. So it's almost the same thing as if like for a couple of months your your shoulder and neck muscles became very, very tense and they became
Mhm.
very, very sore. And he was like, God, that's really like that's quite painful. That's annoying, and you know, but you work through it and then maybe find a physiotherapist or whatever, and then it relaxes and it goes away. And and from a healthy perspective, we think of anxiety in that same context of like it's a thing that happened. It wasn't pleasant when it happened, but now that I understand it, I completely uh I completely understand the context of it and why it happened, so I can let it go. People often say to me, but like if I recover from this, won't this just be this massive trauma in my past of like I lost a year of my life to this, like, and it was a nightmare. And it's like, no, you won't. You actually won't. Like, you look back on this with the same severity that you would if you had had like heart palpitations for a few days. Like it wasn't pleasant, but now you know why it happened and it's gone, you know?
I felt that I'd opened up a can of worms that I wasn't going to be able to kind of get back. That's really what it truly felt like, is I was like, these thoughts are so intense. How am I going to go back to living normally, and they were so obscure and bizarre and led to, honestly, there was a time period with I had a very apathetic view towards thing where I was like, what's the point? Like, because I'm thinking of all these things. It was dark, it was very, very tough. And then you kind of come out the other end of it and you're looking back. And I remember all of these moments. It's just a memory. Like the emotions aren't as charged. And so you just look back and you're like, oh, I remember having that thought. But because the emotions aren't there to follow it, they don't hit you with you're like, yeah, that wasn't fun. And I remember reacting that specific way. But when you realize like, oh, that was just a thought, it doesn't nearly hit you as heavily.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of describing it. The these thoughts are just their words and their images. That's all. Okay? They don't have any intrinsic weight or fear attached to them. Um what gives them an implied fear and weight is the degree to which we focus on them, which depends heavily on the level of anxiety we're experiencing in that moment. So, working through this is not an obstacle course of dealing with all these different thoughts and fears one by one. It's letting them be there. You don't have to like them. You don't have to pretend like they're fun or anything, but you also don't have to consciously engage with them. Let them be there, and then train your training yourself to turn the volume down on the anxiety that's causing these thoughts and feelings, and that gives your body and brain the space to let them go. And then in future, I mean, listen, if you told me like 20 years ago that I'd be talking about this stuff like casually today, like my head would have exploded. Like, but it doesn't bother me to talk about it at all because I'm not talking about them from the context of being in a fight or flight response. I'm talking about them from a non-anxious state and from a practical point of view, in the same way again that I would talk about heart palpitations and muscle tension. So it's not about the thoughts or the feelings; it's about the context of the state of anxiety that you're in when you're having them. That's all. So Brody, I got one more question for you. There's
Yeah.
going to be people watching this interview who may be going through a very, very similar experience to what you went through. Um, uh, what advice would you have for those folks if you could go back and speak to yourself when you first developed anxiety and DPDR? What advice would you have for yourself?
Uh, I would say a couple of things. One, you're going to get through it. I know you have people online that will say they've been in it for a lot longer. Stay off of it. Stay off of online. Get the information you need, trust it, and move forward and stop logging in every day and listening to that. I've noticed that a lot of the people, and this is a big reason why I wanted to talk to you, is a lot of people that recover from this, they just move on with their lives. So you don't see a ton of recovery stories. You don't see a lot of people. The people that are in blogs are the people that haven't recovered. So you need to get the information you need, the proper information, and then move forward. I would say, have that hope, and it is super difficult at points, but just keep going and just go back to living life. You don't need to solve this before you live your life. The recovery process comes in your experiences through life. That is where you recover. It's not through the online message boards. It's meeting people and doing the uncomfortable things and having new experiences that get your mind off of this. And then before you know it, you look back and you're sitting here with Sean.
That's great advice. Thanks, Brody. Man, I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the channel and enjoy Christmas. It's going to be better than
Yeah,
the
thank
last
you.
one.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.